Hello, just making sure we all are on the right track. Today is February 3rd and today is your quiz. Chapter 1 quiz is due. So you have till midnight to do it. So if you have your book, use your book. Most every answer is going to be coming out of your book. If you don't have your book yet, just email me, call me, and then we'll change the date on that and we can work something out. So this class, if you haven't noticed, is kind of into 3 different sections. So we have our chats and our conversations with these videos, and if you were in class, we'd be having conversations about different things. And then we've got the online activities where you have like your web search, your self-exploration. You're going to be doing some discussions next week on traveling and license in different states and different professional organizations, those kind of things. And then we've got the book. So this is an introductory course, and there's no way we can dive deeply into any of those things. And we're just going to skim the top of the surface and kind of get you ready for all the things that could happen in education, right? That's a loaded question because you can never be ready, but at least we'll be exposed. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about your students, understanding your students. And I'm going to start it on chapter 2 of your book. And what I just want to preface with this is understanding your students. You have to understand that they did not come from the same place you came from. So their perspectives will be different than yours. Sometimes when we think about all the students in our class, we think about the situations we've already been in. So if you are from small town, rural, white America, you probably only had small town, rural, white kids in your class. As classmates. And then, or if you came from inner city Chicago, you may have had a whole different background of what you know about a school. It's different than yours. So whether you choose to teach in rural America, inner cities, suburbs, in Montana, out of Montana, just assume that nobody had the same experiences as you did. So once we kind of get past that, and we're looking at all of our students of what did their backgrounds look like? What did they do before they got to you? What kind of was their educational experiences like? Is there any disabilities? Have they been homeless? Is there food insecurities in their home? Is there abuse? Could be alcoholism. So there's lots of different things that come with students that you might not have ever been exposed to before, but they're your students. And remember those first 2 things that we talked about as far as what you need to know in this class. If you forget anything else I say, just please remember that education all is about building relationships with your students, and you are responsible for their learning. So it doesn't matter where they came from or how they got to your classroom. We're going to have to understand that, first of all, they are not like you, so you cannot assume that their background is the same as yours. Okay, so because of that, it's almost impossible for you to look at every student in your classroom and fit your lesson to meet the needs of that student. But what we can do is we can look at, is there different ways I can teach things that might be more acceptable to more students in my class? Or access. So if you're doing junior high English and we have a student who has an IEP or is a little bit slower in the reading process, is it fair to expect the same 200 pages from that student as it is to a student that can read that in one sitting? Well, that depends on what you're grading. If you're grading the amount of reading that student can do, then you're going to have them read that. If you want the content, then does it matter how much that child reads? Maybe we have help. Maybe we have it on audiobook. Maybe we have him read half of it, you read half of it. Maybe you have a buddy read. Maybe you've got some other source of this, because what are we actually assessing? So things like that. So being adaptive and being accessible is one of those things that you can help your students with. On the bottom of page 39 in our book, it talks about adaptive teaching, and that's kind of what I was hitting on there, is that you're going to have to look at your students and think, okay, what can I do to help you that would also benefit anybody else in the class that might be needing that accommodation? You're going to come across the word differentiated instruction all the time in your 300 and 400 level classes. Differentiated instruction is the buzzword of education nowadays. And what that basically means is that I'm going to give an assignment, and how I teach the material for that assignment is going to be on lots of different modalities. So if I was going to teach something in reading, like junior high reading, junior high English, and I want that, am I looking at, can the students take what they've learned in the novel that we're reading and then translate it into a 5-paragraph essay? Okay, so what exactly am I teaching? I'm going to teach how to write that essay. I'm going to teach comprehension skills so the students understand what they're reading. And then we're going to assess on what we're going to be, like what I just assigned, right? But differentiated instruction means that, okay, so that's your end goal. That doesn't mean every student has to get there the same way in the same modality. So if my goal at the end is for them to be able to read, comprehend this book X, Y, and Z, and then write a paper on it, then you backtrack on what I have to teach the students to get to that point, and then you think, how else can I add access or information to students who might not have that ability to learn the way I just told it the first time. So some students, reading is hard. Sometimes it can be hard. And so if you're asking them to read a 200-page chunk and they look at it and all of a sudden their face is like, there's no way. There's like no way. Okay, so maybe we break it up into like 10-page chunks for a couple days at a time. Maybe even in the morning and the afternoon. So if they have a reading buddy, maybe they read out loud 10 pages in the morning and maybe 10 pages before something happens in the afternoon. Maybe they sit with you. You read a page, they read a page. Maybe we have it on audiobook. Maybe we have it, in large print so it's easier to see. Maybe we have a million different things. It could be a million different things because we're still going back to that beginning part. We're just teaching them comprehension skills and to get through the information of the book I'm asking them to do. So differentiated instruction is just changing the access to the same content and we're still getting the same products at the end. Now, modification is something totally different. So when you modify a lesson, you're going to take what you're teaching and look at what you want to assess and then think, okay, this student with an IEP or disability is never going to get that. How can I change that assignment, assessment, or how I teach to shorten or expand on something or to make the assignment and assessment different than the students in the class? That's called modification. There's a difference between accommodation and modification. So accommodation is kind of what differentiated instruction does, is that you're going to change things to fit what is going to work best for your students. Excuse me. Modification means you're going to change the assignment or the context so it can be more applicable to your students. Most often you will never modify unless you have an IEP. And if you're not familiar with an IEP, it's called an Individualized Education Plan, and that's for students that have some type of disabilities. And that would be documented like outside of your realm. So knowing your students, understanding the students in your classroom, you could just assume that every single person in your classroom is going to come with something different. And it's almost like a puzzle piece. You've got to figure out, what can I do to help this child the best that I can? Okay, so I don't know if you really believe in, birth order. But it's true. So if you have a 4-year-old who is the oldest of their family, or if you have a 4-year-old who is the youngest of their family, the behavior of that older and that younger are different. And so their background experiences coming to your preschool or kindergarten is going to look different. So if you're the oldest and you're that 4-year-old, you have had mom's and dad's attention from day one, right? And so if you are the youngest one, you have been dragged to every football practice, every 4-H group, every thing that you're not involved in, but your older brothers and sisters are, so you have to come along and do it anyway. So the older kid is at home with more of a mom and dad centered kind of feeling, where the youngest kid is most often drugged to everything the older kids are going to. So their experiences at 4 are going to be different. Okay, so if you have that in mind, then you think about, okay, who is going to be more of a leadership, who's going to land in that leadership quality position in your classroom? The youngest one or the oldest one? Probably the oldest one, right? Because even though they have been the center of attention at their home, they are probably also responsible for helping all the younger kids do something. So a 4-year-old, maybe they're in charge of picking up the toys or making sure your shoes, are by the front door or something like that. So birth order really does make a difference. Just knowing how old your children are makes a big difference too. I know that sounds kind of silly, but if you're teaching younger grades, that makes a big difference. So understanding your students, how old they are and what developmental level they are is huge. So if you're thinking about kindergarten and the cutoff is September 1st to be 5 years old. Well, what if you have this kid who turned 5 August 29th. Or you have that kid that turned 5 in June. So there's a whole year worth of different levels in your classroom. You have the kid that just turned 5, like he is a minute past 4, and then you have a kid that's going to be 6, like within a matter of weeks. So then you think about what kind of level is that going to be in your classroom. You have definite different structures of social levels between a year at that age, because my goodness, that's like a lifetime. Between a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, that's a whole lifetime worth of changing and growing, and they're going to be in the same class. And where are they in the birth order? Are they in the middle, beginning, end? What does their grade look like? I mean, not grade, but their age look like in months. So when I was teaching kindergarten and preschool, that was always something I kept in mind too. Sometimes I would list them from youngest to oldest in my class, so I would just make sure my younger students were really getting what they needed, and my older students were working more on maybe social skills or different things that they needed help on, and not so much of the maturity things. So something to think about. So understanding your students. Another question with understanding your students. What is more important, IQ or EQ? IQ is an intelligent quotient, right? And so that is like understanding how the world works of knowledge, like you know a lot of stuff. EQ is your emotional intelligence, and that is going to encompass like your motivation, your health, your social skills, your quality of teaching, your prior knowledge, your emotional well-being, your family support, all those things that have to do with the character and the person and like what they know about themselves. So if you have a student that has a high EQ or a student that has a high IQ, which one do you think is going to do better in school? Well, if you look at page 43 on your book, it might be helpful to see it here. So what this is factors contributing to school learning. So this is saying that actually if you have a higher EQ with social competence is higher, that's going to do you better than if you were smart. Knowing your students. So if we know our students are high EQs, then we know exactly what we need to work on. If we know our students are high IQs, we know exactly what we need to work on. You're going to read about different things in your 300 and 400 level classes that have to do with IQ, and I don't know. I've got beef with a lot of it. Like I don't buy it, because IQ tests are like standardized tests. Can we really tell what a student knows by one flash in the pan, 1 second, 1 day, one test? How are they feeling at that day? Did they eat breakfast that day? Were they fighting with their dad in the car? I mean, there could be like a million things before this test happens, and then we're going to judge a student on a 1 second test. Have you ever had an IQ test? They're horrible. They're horrible, because those who do well have awesome, or sometimes feel like they're better than everybody else. And then if you do poorly, you're going to feel, oh my gosh, I'm less than everybody else, when it is strictly a number. So understanding your students, there's so many things. So just when you're kind of thinking about your own classroom, you have to think about, like I said, assume that everyone is not like you. We're going to assume that every student is going to come in with different needs and cultures and backgrounds and perspectives and all of it, right? Every kid comes into a different way. So you may have students in your class that are high EQ, high IQ. You may have kids in your class that have an IEP, which are on the learning disabled, that might need a little extra love. You might have students in your classroom that you modify your lessons for. You should accommodate all of your students at the same time during differentiated instruction. So you have all of these things kind of going all at one time, and you're balancing all these balls, and you're like, how am I supposed to teach anything when this stuff is going on? It's hard. It is hard. That first year is going to be terrible, and it's going to be hard, and you're going to be like survival mode. But once you kind of gotten into the routine and the craft and getting to know the students and building those relationships and knowing how you're supposed to teach the students, like understanding your students, is going to be a lot easier. You are welcome to take notes on your students so you remember things that they say, things that were brought up. Document things if you need to. My first year I had a spiral bound notebook full of things that I was trying to remember about each student that I could help them out with. Eventually it does get better, so you don't have to keep that notebook going, but it's helpful. All right, we'll talk more about understanding your students next week. See ya.